3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
Matt Frisbie, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you?
Thanks, Kevin. It's awesome to be on. I'm really good.
Awesome. Yeah, before we started recording, you mentioned you're Chicago boy. Very cool
Yes,
city.
sir.
I enjoy, I've been there a couple times and I really enjoy the city. But also you mentioned you lived in the Bay Area, and that kind of gets to your background, which I want to cover first before we get into track and trace tools, which you're the founder and CEO of. But that's your technology background, right? You worked formerly at Google, DoorDash, and you said that I think you started your career living in a hacker house before we recorded. You mentioned that 15 other guys. Tell me a little bit about that, man. What's that like?
Yeah, so it was right after I graduated from the University of Illinois. I was just about ready to go work for Allstate Insurance as a software developer, and I was doing a backpacking trip. I was doing a backpacking trip with my dad, and I got a text from my friend, and he's like, "Yeah, I just raised some money. We're doing an ed tech startup. Come work for me." So I'm like, "Okay, here we go." So I bought a plane ticket, packed up a suitcase, and I was living in Palo Alto the next week. And ultimately, the company didn't work out, but it was like, it was this like dirty hacker house, just a couple blocks off University Avenue. We lived 2 blocks away from Tim Cook, so we would see him pretty often. He had nothing to do with us. I mean, it was a wild time, but it was like, everyone was working on their own projects, and it was a great time, a lot of fun, probably a little bit too much fun, but it was a really, really awesome way to like start living in a new area after graduation. And ultimately, that company didn't work out, but I did end up I moved out of that house, and then I started at DoorDash shortly after that. And then, went to Google for a while. And then, Google's a fantastic company to work for. But ultimately, so I spent 4 years there, and I was working on building ads, and it's a comfortable job, but it's ad tech, you're like,
stifles creativity in a way, right? I mean, like you said, it's a very stable job, great benefits, all the perks, right, that you would imagine with a conglomerate like an Amazon or a Google. But once you kind of get in your role and you're really good at what you do, you're kind of like, it's repetitive, right? Doesn't it seem like you're kind of seeing the same projects over and over again year after year?
It is. I mean, it was a wonderful job, and I have my manager was fantastic. My team was great. I still this one of the things I built there is still used like billions of times every day. So it's in any Google ad you see, there's a little X button in the corner. If you click it, there's like a menu. I built that whole thing, and that's been used probably trillions of times since I've worked there, and it's changed very little, which is, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Anyway. But so I was getting comfortable there, and a friend of mine, I was kind of like, well, am I going to be here am I going to make like a career guy, or am I going to move on to the next thing? And of course, I had moved out to the Bay Area to work in tech, and so a friend of mine was like, hey, there's this, legal cannabis is up and coming, and there's this platform called Metrc, which is kind of like the tech compliance side of the industry, and like there's some interesting opportunities in dealing with it. And so I don't know anything about this space, and so I was like, let's start a company, let's jump right in. So put in, we talked about it for a while and put in my 2 weeks, and jumped into the cannabis space. And
were you familiar with cannabis at all prior to that? Like, did you consume or?
Sure. Oh yeah. I mean, I was the
hacker house, I would imagine.
But probably a little bit too much, probably. Quite a bit. Anyway. And so, I jumped in without really knowing much. And, I think that was problematic, because I see a lot of people trying to jump into the industry from like the tech side, and it's problematic because there's a requisite body of knowledge that you need to have before like truly being able to help the industry.
Like what?
Well, you need to really understand the problems. And I see a lot of, there's a lot of kind of people jumping and being like, okay, I'm a web developer. Like, let's build a platform for, let's build a marketplace for like all these companies to like use and sell their wholesale cannabis on. And it's, sounds fantastic if you don't think about it for 2 seconds.
Right.
And so I was the same one, because we jumped in and we're like, oh, we're going to build this awesome marketplace and like everyone will use it, and we'll charge, bips on every transaction, and we're going to make $1 billion. And I mean, it sounds so stupid in retrospect, but it was like, that's the thing.
But that's most tech startups, right? I mean, that's the culture. Yeah.
It's the requisite madness. So you have to start there, but you also have to be competent, which I can say in retrospect that we were not, because we jumped in and it immediately realized like things were going to be much harder for a number of reasons, primarily that no one trusted us. No one trusted us in from the cannabis industry. Like, we are these like Silicon Valley pukes, and like they're just like, who the hell are you? Like, you don't, what can you possibly offer me? Like, I have like this list of 1 million problems that I have to deal with, like keeping my business above water, and you're like, hey, yeah, come use my web app. And they're like, no, they want nothing to do with you. So it's like all the doors were like locked shut, and like they're pressing on their side. It was so hard to get anyone to talk to us.
So relationship building, you kind of realized probably too, right? Like, oh man, like, it's not going to be as easy just to kind of have a good product even. I mean, like, there's going to be.
So, I mean, so that was the other part of it, is like, we were like, okay, what's the angle that we're going to try and get to? And I think it started as like this nebulous marketplace idea. Like, everything will be like phone based, and we'll, have this like whole scanning solution, and like we'll automatically sync with Metrc. And I'm like, okay, sounds great. But like, as like we started to dive into it, and like, 6 months turned into a year and turned into 18 months, I'm like, this is a massive project that competitors, who are still around, have teams of people working on,
right?
At way more money and time than us, way more experience. They already have customers, and like are getting a feedback cycle. And so we had nothing. So it was like, we spent like just like years trying to like get this off the ground and trying different things. And it was just, God, nothing was working. It was, and eventually, like, there's like this, I've heard a really good analogy before. It's like, it's kind of like a fruit like concept. Like when you're building a startup, like there's it's like a banana, right? There's when it's too ripe, like the idea is not fully formed, it's not ready. And then when you've kind of like workshopped it and massaged it a while, like that's kind of the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And if that works, like your company, like that, you'll hit it and you'll get that hockey stick growth and you'll go. But right. if it doesn't work and you keep going, now you've got a rotten banana, and it's just like, then it's time to just cut loose. So it was, it was a couple years, and we'd raised some money and hired, and like, it was just not happening. Like, we were really struggling to get any traction. Like, it was just not happening. So we shut down, which was very painful, and it's hard to admit defeat. But there was this like glimmer of light that happened at the end there. And so what happened was, towards the end, like, you just start trying anything. You're like, okay, you can see the car crash coming. You're just like, oh, like, let's pivot. Yeah, exactly. And so one thing that we had tried, like right at the end, was it was around a period of time when there were a bunch of wildfires in California, and we were primarily California based users. And so I was in trying to get any user feedback at all, like we were monitoring like these like Facebook groups and like Reddit posts, and just seeing like anything, any angle of like, oh, like, let's go build that. And I saw that some farms had completely burned down, and they're, it's California, so everyone's using Metrc. And they're like, I have to void all these tags, because like, I don't remember if they were shutting down or they had like 5,000 tags to void in Metrc. And they were posting about, they're like, I have to spend my whole night voiding these tags one by one, because the only way that you can do it in Metrc is if, and we'll talk about what Metrc is in a moment, I'm sure, is like, you have to like, just like be clicking one at a time, click, click, click. That's one void, thousands of that. And they have to spend their whole night doing that, and their farm just burned down. And so I was like, oh, well, you don't have to do that. Like, I can just build a quick Chrome extension that'll just like go through the whole list and like do it for you,
automate it for you.
So yeah, so I just like threw this thing together overnight, rolled it out, and then they're like, "Oh, this is amazing." So I was like, "Okay, like this is it's on top of Metrc." No, like what else? Great.
You would
like,
have never thought. That's why I'm laughing. It's like, wow, this problem emerged, and it's like light bulb moment, right? Like, okay, here's a need.
Yeah, and it was, and so we tried. It was like, but it was like a side project. Like, we're just like marketplace. Like, this is just to get like people to onboard. So we're like trying to build this extension to like kick people into the marketplace, and like running ads for at the period of time when like it was like $200 a pound. it was just a disaster. And so anyway, so company shut down, and then I was shutting down all our all the servers and everything like that, including the Chrome extension. And we had built some stuff into it by that point. And then I send like we're shutting down email to all the users. And I started to get a lot of emails back from people. They're like, no, we need this. Like, do not shut this down. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. All right, let's explore this. So the company is shut down. Like, I don't, this is dead, but like there's something here. So I sent out a survey. I was like, what do you need? Like, what's most important from people? And then I got enough responses that they're like, yeah, like this is a really critical part of our business. So I was like, okay, let's rethink this entire thing. Like, throw the marketplace away. That's not working. Throw all this nonsense away. Let's start from scratch. Like, this is a platform that's working, is like getting people to use and install. Let's I'm going to start over on my own, and let's turn this into an open source project, because one major components that's worked with track and trace tools so far is that it's a completely new concept in the community, that like this is free. It's a free piece of software that anyone can use it. There's no accounts, there's no subscription fees. It's a free product for the cannabis community. And my vision for the project as a whole is this suite of like free tools. And I think a large part of that is because Metrc is becoming kind of the de facto standard in the United States. And so the cannabis industry writ large is going to be subjected, it seems very likely, pretty much everywhere to Metrc.
Let's dive in real quick and explain what Metrc is. Yeah, just so that people have a back. I'm sure most do, but yeah.
Sure. So it all starts in Colorado, and I think it's like whenever Colorado the first proposition passed around like 2010, 2011. But it's basically gone the same in every state. And so the process is Metrc is best understood from like it arrives from a place of need. So a state passes cannabis legalization, usually via proposition or legislative session. And then that'll usually spawn into existence some sort of new regulatory body within the state, some cannabis name. It doesn't really matter. It's pretty much the same everywhere. And then that regulatory body, and there's a rulemaking process where they need to figure out, okay, how are we going to actually apply cannabis legalization in this state? And one major slice of that is, how do we employ a track and trace tools program? A track and trace program. And what that means is that, how do we achieve two things? One is that, how do we make sure that we're collecting the taxes that we need to collect, which is, basically what got this proposition approved in the first place. And two, how do we ensure that product is not commingling with the black market? And those are really the two main aspects of it. So what allows regulators to make sure that, okay, we've got business XYZ, how can we make sure that this person isn't diverting product or accepting product from the black market, or what have you, whatever it is? How do we make sure that they're playing by the rules? Mm-hmm. And that is the core piece of what Metrc comes in. So the state will put out an RFP, and then many track and trace companies, Metrc is the main one, will come in and place bids for that RFP. And then the state will decide, who we're going to pay, and then they'll accept a bid, and then now that's the track and trace program for that state. And so this is what happened in Colorado in 2011. So Metrc was a company, they had been working on other things, but they were kind of like circling around this RFID technology for tags. And then they come in and they say, okay, well, let's apply this to the cannabis space. So we'll build, we've got this tagging system. We can build this like software platform along with it. We can build this turnkey solution for regulators, and then we can roll it out from there and like see how it goes. So they did it in Colorado, and it worked. And then they started rolling it out to other states. And now, fast forward, many, many years later, now that they are the preeminent provider of track and trace software for any state. So, I mean, I guess the big, So I guess we'll go from there. So talking about the actual internals of Metrc. So what does the track and trace program actually mean? So it means that somebody can look in and follow the lineage of any consumer product back to its source. So for example, let's say you've got, a pre-roll that's sold in a dispensary. That pre-roll was sold at a dispensary as part of a package, metric term package. And then that was sourced by another package. So let's say a box of 200 pre-rolls that was sourced from another package before it was turned into pre-rolls as like bulk trim. That came from another package, which was the bulk flower taken from the harvest. That was sourced from a harvest that came from a bunch of plants,
right?
So on and so forth. And at each stage,
end to end,
end to end, exactly. And so at each stage, the way that Metrc does this is that there is a little plastic RFID tag that is paired with each point in the process. And this tag ties into the Metrc software. And then the businesses are responsible for buying these tags from Metrc, in which the state requires them to do, and applying them in a very specific way. So every mature plant grown in a Metrc state gets a tag. Every package, which is any unique amount of stuff, which is a pretty nebulous term, but it's like box of pre-rolls, box of flour, box of,
the product,
a certain amount of oil, a quantity of something, some item type. And then these packages are transferred in between licenses, and then it all flows downhill. And then a regulator can go into Metrc, they have their own interface, and they can see, okay, let's follow along this entire thing. We can make sure that, all these businesses are playing by the rules. Everything looks good, everything checks out. I can go and audit a facility, make sure their tags are in place. Great. And so this is what Metrc is selling to regulators, and the regulators love it, right? They go, okay, fantastic. Like that's, this suits all our needs. This is great. And so Metrc has become by far the best company at pitching states and getting these contracts, especially since that Illinois, the state I live in, just flipped from BioTrack to Metrc, which is a big change. Because
I was going to say BioTrack's a competitor, right? Because I think New Mexico is BioTrack.
Sure. So BioTrack is a competitor, and so which brings up a great point, which is, and this is kind of the first wrinkle in this this whole track and trace situation, which is that how do these businesses like make enough money? And so you can see these bids and contracts, they're public record. You can go online and look at them, see which states, how much they're paying Metrc, all the things that they require Metrc, things like that. It's all public record. And the contracts are not very big. I mean, they're millions of dollars. Great. But like, that's, on the scale of like a large business, like I think Metrc has like 160 employees or something, and they're big. That's not very much money. And so the big part of their business is selling these RFID tags to companies. And so I think that, that's really what allows us to work, that they've figured out this angle. They go, okay, we've been able to scale out our RFID tech. And, we can build this, a very appealing track and trace model that states can buy into. And then all the companies in that state must buy tags from us. And so, which is a great moat to have. If you've got the state saying you have to buy our product and in quantities of tens of thousands, fantastic. Like what a business model. They're the envy of everyone. So, I mean, I applaud them for that. They really know which side their bread is buttered on. And so the wrinkle though, is that I think that the incentives are a little bit perverse, because there are lots of people have lots of problems with Metrc in a lot of different ways. And so I think one major problem is that is embodied by the idea that the cannabis businesses that are using Metrc are not the customers, right? They're paying Metrc, they're paying them dollars for their tags and for fees and things like that, but they're not the customers. It's the regulators. So all the incentive is for Metrc to keep the regulators happy and do enough to keep their platform going. But the problem is that their platform is just not very good. They're clearly not a software company. For years, they've had huge software problems in all sorts of different ways. And it's bad software exists everywhere, but the problem is that we are at the nexus of a very intractable problem, which is that you have to use Metrc to report to the state, but the Metrc doesn't work. As a cannabis business, you are really in a pickle. It's problematic. And so I'll give you two different examples of this, of companies that I've worked with. So the first one was I was working with a farmer who was testing out the harvest feature of track and trace tools, the product I work on. It was a little buggy at first. And so but he wanted to use it. And so he would report his harvests at like 4 a.m. So, and he wanted me to be on the phone with him when he was like reporting his harvests with the software. And so the reason that he would do this is because, the plants would be harvested overnight. They have to be weighed and reported to Metrc. And then that information all has to be recorded. And then to send the plants offsite for processing, or he was sending it somewhere else to a distributor or whatever. You have to have a transfer manifest. And if you don't have that, you just have a printed piece of paper saying, where it's going, what's in the truck, things like that, like simple, basic stuff. But it's like, it has to come from Metrc. It has to be recorded there. And if he doesn't have that piece of paper, he is totally exposed to anything the state wants to do with him. So it's like, I'm on the phone with this guy. We're like clicking through like stuff in Metrc, and it's going faster because he's using the software. But like his whole I can hear there's like an army of truck drivers like in the background waiting to drive off site, but they need this one piece of paper printed from Metrc before they can leave. And so it's like it's those sort of bottlenecks that like are just it shouldn't work this way. It should not work this way.
And in that example, is it because like they haven't moved to digital, like that certification or whatever that paper is, like it's not digitally available? Or
so it's complicated. So the need for the printed piece of paper is a consequence of state regulation. So state of California says that you have to have the printed manifest
got it
in it with you, but to get to that manifest, you have to do all the Metrc stuff first. And so that requires Metrc to function. And it often doesn't for lots of different reasons. And so that, these businesses cannot afford downtime. So I'll give you another example. So one of my clients, they gave me a call some week, or it was like on a Friday, and they said, listen, so they're a huge processor. And they said, listen, we have so much stuff in Metrc that like their servers are broken for us. Like we have too much stuff returning. It doesn't work at all. So we can't transfer anything off site. So pretty much the same problem. Like we have to be creating these transfers in Metrc. Can't. So we're like, this huge operation has come to a complete standstill because like they can't submit this stuff to a website. And so they're like, you're the only solution that can help us. So just by kind of the way that my software works, like I was able to like get them unstuck and, over the weekend, throw together a solution. But they said, we called Metrc support, and they said like a week, like it'll take us a week to roll out a fix for you. It's like an hour is a problem. What are you talking about? A week? Like that's not like these businesses cannot afford to have this amount of downtime. It's just it's incompatible with like how their businesses need to operate.
It sounds like it goes back to that problem though of like how their stakeholders are the regulators and not the end customer, right? So they're probably not very well equipped to handle customer service inquiries like that because that's not what their focus is in terms of making the end user happy. That's the regulators. Would you agree?
So I think so. It's an important caveat that I'm not so sure finger pointing at Metrc is necessarily the solution, because ultimately I think it stops with the regulators to make sure that the businesses in their constituency are taken care of, and they're clearly not doing this, and they're paying for the software and at least tacitly accepting that this is happening to them. And I think that Metrc is doing what they're doing what they're paid to do. They found a business model that works, that they can they're
expand their footprint. Yeah,
they're expanding they found a way to make this work. They go, okay, these are the state contracts that are coming to us. We've found a way to make a business out of this. Go do it. And I think that they've sort of gone like, okay, well, if we don't have good software, like as long as it sort of works, like this is okay. And I guess from their perspective, that sort of makes sense. But from my perspective, like I've interacted with so many businesses that the list of problems that they have with Metrc and like Metrc adjacent stuff is too long to count. And so go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, so is that kind of the turning point? Like, as you dove in more to Metrc, because again, they're the standard, right? They're becoming the standard as new states come online. Like, was that kind of the pivot in terms of the new company that you were creating, and to really help maybe address some of those challenges that operators are facing when they're using Metrc?
Yeah, so I'll unpack that in a couple different ways. So the angle that I've taken with track and trace tools is that there's Metrc is built in this like really strange way. So typically for a platform like this, where you're dealing with these like digital assets like RFID tags that are being issued by Metrc, there's like an API to deal with them, and so other people can obtain API keys. Traditional model would be able to easily obtain API keys, manipulate them however they want, right. And then basically automate all the stuff that you would otherwise be doing in a desktop browser. What Metrc has done, and which is extremely confusing, is that they have basically built an API, one, that does not work very well, and two, it can't actually do everything that you need to do as a business. So there are some very large chunks completely absent from the API. And this is not a mistake, because they've recently rolled out a Metrc Connect platform, which has addressed some problems with the API, but still absent from the API are these two giant pieces that you cannot function as a business without. And so when I was working at this at the failing startup, I was like trying to like make this API work, and it was just not happening. And so I guess what I eventually did was I was so overwhelmed by the workload, I got a chance to look at their website, and I was able to like pick it apart into its pieces, and I go, okay, well, the website can obviously do everything, because that's where 70% of Metrc users don't use some sort of third-party software like Canix or whatever. They're just using Metrc. And so everyone's just logging into metrc.com anyway. And so I go, okay, well, metrc.com can do everything. Like, why can't I write software that basically wraps around that? And so I go, okay, Chrome extension is the easiest way to do that. And boom, we were off to the races. And so, so I guess the core piece of
I'm gonna say, just it's fascinating how you developers can just like the problem solving skills that you have in this modern day era is amazing. So I gotta tip my hat off to, because I've worked with lots of developers. I grew up in the tech industry in my career, and for you to just kind of see that and be like, oh yeah, Google extension, here we go. I know probably working at Google helped kind of the ins and outs, but still, man, to be able to just see that, it's pretty cool.
I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think in this case, it was really, I was like, I cannot do this as a single developer. Like every developer wants to believe they're Superman and can like build out this huge thing by themselves. But it got to a place where I was like, I cannot, because you have to be certified in every single, if you're doing third-party API, you have to be certified in every single state independently for that state's version of Metrc, which is basically the same. And so I'm like, one dude, I have like, every time we have a user, like, oh, Oklahoma, okay, got to go get certified in Oklahoma. Oh, Michigan wants to join. Okay, do Michigan. Oh, we need some sort of insurance in Michigan. Like, it's a whole thing. One person cannot do it. So I said, okay, I can't do this. Let's just go around this and kind of just go straight at the problem. and yeah, it's really taken off. It's really taken off from there. So that's that's been the guiding light.
So let's talk about it. Let's talk about track and trace tools. So I mean, you touched on like the origin, right, and kind of where the inspiration came from, but tell us the real value of the platform and currently, you know, what customers are experiencing. I think there's 1,000 that you have, over 1,000.
Over 1,000 companies are using it. So it's so as I kind of alluded to before, the basic idea is that the people are using this very poorly built website that behind the scenes is able to do all of the business functions that they need. And so kind of the way that the product works is that it just sits on top of you being logged into Metrc.com and then is able to automate all the things that you would normally be doing. So it's kind of this like, it's like the tagline is it supercharges your Metrc workflow, but it really does. It's it's like things that you'd be doing 1,000 clicks for, like you can do with 1 click, like that sort of thing. And then the other, and I think a much more interesting angle is that the Metrc.com interface allows you to access information that you can't otherwise access, even with the API. And this is proving to be a really interesting direction that the product's taken, because we talked about how the whole track and trace supply chain thing works before. So all the businesses in Metrc Stakes are generating all this information about how their businesses work, where things are going, and all this is being tracked in Metrc. Like they're saving all this information. But the official way that Metrc says go get this, talk to our platform does not provide you this information back. It's all locked in. You can see it in the website, and that's how I ultimately access it, is that I can go, okay, well, I'll just go get it this other way. But they're kind of frowning upon, I guess, like people accessing the information that they themselves have generated. So like I'll give you an analogy. So like think about like when you log into your like checking account and you see like a history of transactions. You'll get a little, you'll get 30 characters describing like a purchase you made at a grocery store or on Amazon or whatever. Like That's all the bank is giving you. They have way more information than that. They have collected a ton of information about that data, who you bought from, where you were, what day it was, all the information. They have it all. They're not giving it to you, but it's there.
Interesting.
And I think,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you don't think about it, but like, I mean, they don't want to expose that. I guess part of it is like the customers may not need it as much. However, cannabis businesses, and especially the clients that I work with, they have found a lot of value in that data. And so they go, okay, well, let's, we really want to automate a way of extracting all this. Like, what's our, they're generating like tax information and
like data insights, right? Like you mean to kind
precisely
of inform the business, right?
Yeah. So everyone, ultimately, if we, we've talked about a lot of low level stuff. And so if let's like go from a high level, Metrc is ingesting all the supply chain information and they're feeding it to regulators. And businesses are not getting a lot back. So they're putting all this information in, they can't really access it unless they're using my software. Or, they're buying these RFID tags from Metrc, which are like 25 to 45 cents a piece. And they're buying like, tens of thousands, huge quantities of them. Right. But it's like, they don't really have it's for the regulators to scan. Like the businesses, they don't have a good way of like if you want to scan an RFID tag, like go try and buy an RFID tag scanner. So a passive UHF RFID scanner, they're like $2,000. They're super expensive. And then on top of that, like all of like there's like these third-party solutions that like, we support RFID tag scanning, but now you got to pay more to like use this subscription to like scan your tags. So it's like a half solution, and they're billing it as a full solution. And I think it's, they're supporting the regulators, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous for them to go out and say, yeah, like we're supporting the businesses, we're helping the businesses track this stuff, when it is clearly on its face for the purposes of supporting the regulators and supporting the regulators only. Like this is not built to help the businesses. This is so they can keep the businesses tracked.
Right. So what's the, I mean, you've talked about the motivation behind the project now. Like where do you foresee it going in the future? I mean, what is your ultimate goal for track and trace tools?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of the users have responded really well to like the open nature of it. So, I do make my money consulting, but it's like, most of the users do not pay for the product. I'm prototyping an inexpensive like paid subscription, but like the main income is I deal with large clients who really want to like get the most juice out of their metric, or out of their metric data. But ultimately, that's only a portion of kind of like where I see this going. So one, I think like more open products based off of where kind of Metrc is heading is like this kind of the giant in the industry. Because I think where I see the road going is, I think most states are ultimately going to be using Metrc, and as I mentioned before, 70% of businesses are just using plain Metrc. And I there's a lot of rent seeking in the industry that really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So I think that there should be like this a more open suite of tools that these companies should have access to. And the other software solutions out there right now, I think are just they're kind of built with a Silicon Valley software mentality model in mind, which is like, let's raise money, let's get big, and like let's find like an angle where we can like come in and like make the most money off these companies. And that is it, that works in other places and that's traditionally worked. The problem is though that the industry right now is just not built to support that kind of business model. Like,
it's not the
model of
the
like
timing's not there, right?
It's just not like these companies cannot afford it. They can't. I talk to these companies all the time and they go, we're using a third party solution and it doesn't really do what we need, and we're really trying to cut expenses, so we're just leaving it behind and like kind of really trying to streamline our operations. And so that's totally that's kind of where I see coming in, is like, let's find a much smaller, more compact way of like these companies managing their compliance solutions instead of these like big monolithic expensive pieces of software, because it's fundamentally incompatible with most of the industry, because it's largely the licenses are largely mom and pop shops and they're struggling right now. And so, I think really solutions that are more dialed into the scale of their needs really seems to be resonant. So I guess I'm exploring more ways that I can like leverage kind of open software that's interacting with Metrc. So I think one direction that I think is really compelling, as I kind of touched on before, is like, why isn't there an open scanning solution? So people are paying thousands of dollars a year to buy these relatively expensive tags, and you're not really provided a way to scan them unless you're like, okay, let's go get a subscription. So there are ways that you can find a more focused model to address this problem. I think another direction that I'm kind of considering is like, how can we maximize the way that people are extracting value from their Metrc information? So like really like advanced reports, like reading directly out of Metrc, because for a lot of these companies, like that's their ultimate data store. Like that encompasses all the information about their business, and there's a lot of value in there, and they can extract it relatively cheaply. Like it's not complicated to do this stuff.
Right. And it's so important, right? I mean, it's so important. I mean, we all know, being in tech, data is gold. And in a burgeoning industry like cannabis, where there's so many different formulations of the product and so many different ages, right? The age ranges that consume this product, from 21 and above. I mean, it's crazy, and to not have data to really inform business decisions is a handicap. I mean, it's vital.
Yeah, and I think that's, and it may be as time goes on, because I have a good relationship with Metrc, and I've talked with people at the company regularly, and so I have kind of an idea of where they want to go. And it seems they do care. Like they don't want to do they don't want to do a bad job. And I think that they're very sensitive to the fact like that they have all these problems. And I think a lot of the problems are kind of that they started with a really poorly built piece of software and then kind of got successful too quickly. And then basically as soon as they did that, as soon as they started inking contracts, then like all these requirements dropped on them from the states, like that takes all their time. I don't know that that's the case, but it seems like completely plausible because they have to do, anytime a state has a rule change or whatever, like that has to be reflected in their software, and that takes a lot of time. Right. So I think that they do care. And ultimately, if they really want to be successful, I think that they have to make some drastic changes for like, one, their platform needs to like work better in a lot of different ways. But two, I think that the upstream of that, the regulators that are demanding this stuff from like that are purchasing, or that are giving out these contracts, really need to take a close look at like the second order impacts of the things that they're doing, because I mean, these are big problems for these companies. Like I will openly admit that I have cut off a very tiny piece of the industry that I'm able to, address well as a one-man shop, but like they have a million problems, but this one is a particular pain point that keeps popping up. And so I think I think the states really need to figure out like what do we really, how can we really implement a track and trace program that gives us the information we need, that we can effectively, monitor this industry, while at the same time not being this unbelievable burden for all these companies. And at the same time, for Metrc to kind of reconfigure its software, if they really want to kind of go to the next level, they need to kind of figure out a way that they can actually be an asset to these businesses and stop pretending to be such an asset to these businesses.
Right. Well, I mean, I gotta say, as we wrap up, Matt, there's a number of good things that you're doing here. One is obviously you're providing a solution that is needed, where you're kind of filling in the gaps of some of the things that Metrc is, hopefully trying to start accounting for and starting to address. But two, you're shedding a light on it, right? I mean, if Metrc is going to be the standard among the majority of states that become, adult use cannabis, we need to start talking about these things, right? And start improving as an industry. Like you said, we're not pointing blame or anything like this. I mean, the industry is growing, right? Everything's evolving each day. But I really, really am happy that you're kind of bringing light to some of these challenges. I mean, the RFID tags that you mentioned, not having the scanner, and then even just the access to getting the scanner and the the amount of money it costs, or even the subscription models that are out there where you'd have to pay to get those things scanned. But then the really important thing in my mind is the data insights and what valuable information you can get from these transactions from an organization like Metrc. So, Matt, I mean, I really appreciate it. I learned a lot today, man. I want to leave the floor with you, though. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to touch on before we go here?
No, but I think that I think you really led up nicely to kind of a main point that I think is kind of the nice cherry on top to this conversation, which is I just, based on the prevailing sentiment of like where the industry is right now and kind of the stagnation of legislation and things like that, I think that people, safe banking is like taking forever to pass, and we'll see if it does. But I think people really need to get comfortable with the idea that like the status quo, like where we are right now, is not going to meaningfully change, or very slowly change. So what that ultimately means for companies is that they kind of need to make, like, there are all these problems, but you need to find a way to make it work with like how things are right now. So if like for businesses, that means like cutting costs in any way you can, like finding simpler ways to do it, like getting rid of the waste. Like this is the time to, consolidation's happening. It's time to get lean. And so things ultimately don't seem like they're changing very fast. So I think, except that, things like, banking is going to remain difficult in the foreseeable future. Metrc is going to be around for the foreseeable future. I mean, they'll certainly make steps forward, but like, it's going to take the form that it currently is for quite a long time, because I think things are moving much slower than anyone else. So yeah, I think things are going to change a lot slower than people want. So to remain viable businesses and to stay above water, you got to trim the fat where you can.
Yeah. Very, very sound advice. Stay lean at this point. I mean, it's going to kind of help in the future, because if you prioritize now, right, then later on you can kind of think, do we really need that? Or, maybe let's put more money to this particular solution or this particular strategy or software solution, whatever it is. Right. And so, Matt, really appreciate it again, man. Where can people find you online? You mentioned that you were a consultant as well. If they want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, super easy to find. So if you Google track and trace tools, like I'm like the first two results, trackandtrace.tools is the website. So any of those, it'll take it to me. It's there. It's a free extension. There's no sign up. It just sits on top of your Metrc account, and it's all open source. So if you want to download the code and build it yourself, you can totally do that.
That's awesome, man. Hey, and congratulations on winning the SEO for track and trace tools.
Thank you. As I still can't believe it. Yeah.
Great. Well, hey, Matt, appreciate the time again. And thank you all for listening.
All right. Thank
Bye.
you.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.